Hello and welcome to In the Spotlight with Quocirca, the definitive podcast on digital disruption in the print industry. I'm Louella Fernandes, Director of Quocirca, and today I'm joined by Anthony Vigliotti, VP of Product Marketing at Ysoft. Today we'll be discussing cloud opportunities for printing and specifically looking at how Ysoft is differentiating in the market with its dual approach to cloud print management and document workflow. So welcome, Anthony. It's really great to have you here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So maybe we could start, if you could tell us a bit about yourself. I know you've been in the print industry for some time, so if you could tell us a bit about your career to date and your role at Ysoft.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity for that. First, I'll start with my role at Ysoft. So I am a proud member of the Ysoft family. I currently hold the position of the VP of Product Marketing. We have several responsibilities in my team. One of them is the entire life cycle of the product. One thing that most people aren't aware about Ysoft is that it's just not print management. We have card readers that we manufacture and sell ourselves. We have the OMNI Bridge platform, which I'll go into more detail during our conversation today. Also 3D printing and scanning. In addition to managing that software lifecycle, I also manage a voice of customer. So this is gathering customer input, partner input, and making certain that those business requirements are fed into our product development lifecycle and ultimately, the final product delivered. Also strategic planning and product launch and ongoing marketing activities around all of those efforts. But if you allow me to, walk down memory lane for a bit, my career actually started about 20 years ago in this particular industry. And I started my print management expertise at Xerox. At Xerox, at that time, if you remember, this was like analog. There was no digital copier at the time. There wasn't a touchscreen interface at the time. So this is really at the ground floor of where this particular segment started. So we helped develop and deliver the first APIs around accounting, authorization, and authentication. The first web-based application platform known as Xerox EIP, which many of the ISVs in the space are still using to this day. First integrated card-based authentication solution. So I'd like to say that we helped build the particular segment that we're in. I watched it grow to the particular place where it is now. And I've watched this, from analog to digital, departmental to personalized, to on-prem and to now cloud. I've seen it all in my 20 years experience.
Yeah, so, I think what we've seen, just the way you've described how the industry has changed so significantly over the last, 20 to 30 years. And I think cloud printing, like you say, is the new opportunity, particularly for OEMs to capture more revenue opportunities beyond the hardware. So we're seeing cloud printing increase in adoption, but there's so many approaches to cloud printing in the market. So maybe you could discuss a bit of the challenges that you see around printing that's giving rise to the need to move to the cloud print infrastructure, and particularly how that's changing in today's work from anywhere environment.
Yeah, work from home has certainly changed the game quite a bit. As you can tell, I'm not sitting in my normal physical office. I'm actually sitting at my kitchen table. That's just some of the challenges that are challenging the industry and manufacturers, partners, customers alike. But the first thought I will leave you with is business, audit, and regulatory compliance. A lot of things have been relaxed during COVID. Schools, games, any external activity like restaurants, even going to the park sometimes is challenging to do. But what hasn't been relaxed during COVID or the pandemic? Regulatory compliance. So PII is still important. It is just as important now as it was before the pandemic had started. And companies must be in position to drive compliance and to deliver chain of custody, regardless if an employee is working from home or in their physical office. Okay, so that's one thought. The second thought I'll leave you with is around security. So if you think about cloud printing, it implies that a physical device, a printer or a multifunction device needs to communicate through a customer's firewall into the cloud. Now think about all the dollars, the time and effort a customer's IT department has spent trying to protect and secure their corporate environment. And that is a known environment. They created it, they built the architecture, they know it well. Now add work from home. You literally have tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of employees potentially working from their home office. These are essentially known, unknown, widely different network configurations. And I would say that cloud will help bridge the gap between what was once a very difficult challenge with on-prem solutions and the simplicity that cloud brings and the interconnectivity it brings will help transition work from home customers to the cloud. The last thought I'll leave you with is the lack of standardization. So unfortunately, device manufacturers haven't standardized in a way to connect to cloud. There's different approaches, and this requires ISVs like Wysoft to figure out how we're going to get from a customer's home environment, corporate environment to the cloud. Some are using edge technology, some are using appliances, and I'm sure we'll cover that in more detail in our conversation today. But just to conclude, Wysoft provides a centralized approach to this print management, automated compliance with this regulatory problem I just mentioned, a trusted level of security that both corporate IT can leverage for both their corporate networks and users' home networks, and a standard method of management for all these devices, regardless of what make or model that end user might be having in their home environment.
Yes, and I think you've touched on some of the key challenges we're seeing as well in Quocirca's research around the expanded threat landscape because of the increased amount of remote working, and as you mentioned, that's giving rise to the need to better protect printing processes, whether they're in the home or the office environment. And one thing we've seen is that whether it's a large business or a small business, they're not immune to these security risks. So, what would you say are the main differences between the SMB and enterprise requirements? Because security is, absolutely key to both those organization types. But are you seeing any difference in requirements when it comes to cloud printing in particular?
Yeah, I would offer like three observations here. The first observation is the core requirements for SMB versus the enterprise are really the same. You already just mentioned one word in your question, which is security. I would also mention convenience. I'd also bring up regulatory compliance, which I touched on. If you were to mention those three key words to any customer of any size, I guarantee you they'd all raise their hand, shouting as for those to be requirements for their deployment. So whether it's SMB or enterprise, I think those core requirements are the same. One difference I will point to, though, is we're seeing around shared versus reserved infrastructure. So let me just define those real quick. Shared infrastructure is when you have a single cloud instance and multiple tenants that you then deploy to your customer base. So it's a shared resource pool with tenants that allow you to segregate your data and deploy that service to that customer. This is different than a reserved infrastructure. These are customers that don't want to commingle their data or their processes and want a reserved cloud instance for them. So what we're typically seeing is SMB more aligned to the multi-tenant shared infrastructure, and larger enterprises, or ones that are typically concerned with higher levels of security, being more aligned to the reserved infrastructure. Okay. The second thing I'll mention is ad hoc versus structured workflow. So when I think of ad hoc, I think of an end user walking up to a device or sitting at their PC, and that end user themselves deciding what to do with that particular document they need to scan, or what finish options they need for the printer or the document they're about to print, versus structured, which is the business process will dictate what needs to happen with that particular document, how it's scanned, where it goes, how it's named. So we typically see that SMB requirements are more aligned to the ad hoc capabilities, where enterprise is more aligned to the structured processes where the business process defines what has happened. And the last thought I'll leave you with is a growing list of SMB integrations that are required. So when I think of enterprise, I think of, yes, they want to scan to OneDrive or SharePoint or whatever their electronic file sync and share DMS system might be. But with SMB, there's a much wider array of cloud services that they deploy. Salesforce for their CRM system, LegalZoom for their legal application, Sage or Intuit for their financial applications, and the list goes on. So what we're finding is we need a much longer list of extensions, mostly based on cloud services that we will connect to. So in summary, Wysoft is leveraging our capabilities that we've gathered over the last 20 years to provide that security convenience, to make certain we cover both ad hoc and structured business processes, and that we're developing these extensions quick enough to allow us to grow into the SMB space as they also grow their cloud services with other partners.
And I think that's a great way to really sort of get a bit of an understanding of, Wysoft's strategy, because, obviously it's very focused on the SMB market, but it's got these capabilities for the larger enterprises as well. And I know Wysoft is taking very much an appliance approach with its OMNI Bridge platform, which it announced recently. But can you explain a bit more about the strategy behind this?
If you go back to one of my questions and answers earlier, I mentioned that cloud implies that you need to be able to penetrate through a customer's firewall, corporate environment into the cloud. And the reason that these technologies need to exist is for that purpose. So our first approach is what we call OMNI Bridge. And you can think of this as an appliance. Very simple appliance. It's somewhat small, maybe the size of 2 deck of cards. It's plug and play. You literally open the box, plug it into your corporate network, and the rest of it is managed and deployed from the cloud. So there's nothing you do on site in order to maintain this particular appliance. And the job of this appliance is to communicate from the local network that you're on, allow those devices and PCs that are in that local network to connect to the Wysoft cloud service, the print management in the cloud. So why we are doing this is because some customers don't want their print data to leave their corporate environment. Some have to pay for the payload of that going out of the cloud and then back to their printer. Some just don't want, from a security perspective, that transaction to occur in the cloud. Also, for those customers that have latency issues in their network, if you think about every interaction at the panel of a multifunction device, those screens are served from a server. In this case, the server will be in the cloud. So if you have latency issues, you typically don't want that transaction to leave your environment to go to the cloud to come back. It'll yield an unwieldy end user experience at the panel of the device. There's also infrastructure that's built into these devices for high availability and resiliency that we've been able to leverage with our years of experience. Why did we choose this approach? One is we thought that, with this appliance is dedicated and we're not relying on PC software that's shared across the environment. The OMNI Bridge handles all the communication to and from the cloud and all the devices and PCs. So any printing that a user might be doing doesn't impact any other user. It's literally a dedicated appliance for that purpose and that purpose alone. There's no client software to maintain and update, and we'll get to this, but the OMNI Bridge is really a platform. So while we're talking about one application that allows you to connect your devices to the cloud, we have a roadmap of other applications, and these can be extended to the OMNI Bridge that you have in your environment. Okay. The second approach, which is patently different from the first approach, is a pure cloud approach. So there's no OMNI Bridge, there's no edge software, there's no client software. This is truly a zero local infrastructure type of requirement. And some of the MFP vendors already have platforms that allow this to occur. So KM with their marketplace, Xerox with their Connect Key apps, HP with their WorkPath, and there's various others, not to leave anybody out. But with this approach, we have the ability to connect multifunction devices and printers directly to the cloud without any infrastructure in place, OMNI Bridge not required. So the good news is that Wysoft is taking both approaches, and we can serve the demands and requirements of customers that need one or both. You can work in a hybrid environment too.
Yeah, so I guess you're addressing the needs of customers, regardless of whether they've got a mixed vendor fleet, but also you can support them on that cloud journey depending on whether they're utilizing a private cloud or hybrid cloud. And I guess these are different solutions depending on where they are on that cloud journey.
Yes, yeah, correct.
Yeah, so that's just given us some insight into the dual approach you mentioned that you're taking. So can you maybe share some examples of how Wysoft has helped customers transition to the cloud? Maybe what were their challenges, what were the reasons for moving, and what business outcomes they've achieved with making that shift to cloud printing?
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, and we're learning more customer examples every day. So I'll share 3 of my examples with you now. I have to say I'm pretty excited about some of the use cases that we're seeing. Some of them were predicted and some of them were not. So I purposely have chosen some that were predictable and some that might be intriguing for you and your viewers. So the first example is a large IT services customer in the US. They're in a computer-aided design type of organization. And this is the one that's pretty predictable. So they have an on-premise deployment today. They've recognized the cost savings and the benefits of going to the cloud, and they've chosen to do that. The highlight here is they wanted a reserved deployment. So this is not a shared instance where multiple tenants, they wanted to make certain their data was segregated. So we provided reserve deployment option for them. And they also chose to go the zero local infrastructure route. So they're not using the OMNI Bridge or any appliance or anything on site. Example number 2 is where it gets a little interesting with respect to the use case. So this is a public utility company in Poland. They were an existing SafeQ on-premise customer, and they had a set of requirements that really drove the need for them to move to the cloud. One of them is they had a requirement for Google G Suite. This is not an Active Directory customer or an Active Directory customer at all, so they had that requirement. They also have a lot of acquisitions. So in this particular space, they acquire companies, and as a result of that, they move between physical offices time and time again. So if you can imagine the IT complexity that raises, it's pretty much an unknown environment. And every single time they acquire or they move, they have to integrate yet another IT environment. So what we're able to do is migrate that entire infrastructure to the cloud. And once they on-ramp or acquire a new physical location or new utility, they simply connect them to their cloud instance and pretty much can forget about any of that legacy IT infrastructure that they had in their environment. And lastly, being mixed fleet, multi-vendor, they're acquiring these devices, and they don't really have relationships with many of the multifunction vendors that now are in their environment. So they've elected to go through a direct support model with Ysoft. So regardless of maker model, they have the opportunity to call and leverage on us. And the third and equally interesting use case is who's able to leverage our SafeQ cloud technology. And what they've done is they've hosted their own multi-tenant offering, and they've built their own targeted approach through the K through 12 environment. So they're actively pursuing K through 12 accounts. And once they win a K through 12 account, they simply light up another tenant for that particular customer.
Yes, and I think it just really shows the kind of the diversity of the cloud market and the opportunity, particularly with organizations that you mentioned that we're managing print on-premise and we're working with MFP vendors. And I think companies like Ysoft can really provide a differentiation point in terms of providing this kind of vendor agnostic platform that enables them to support their mixed fleet environments. So I'm just curious in terms of, obviously with the pandemic, we've seen a real acceleration in adoption of the cloud to really support digital transformation initiatives. And have you seen any instances where the pandemic has really helped your customers, sort of accelerate their digitization efforts? And, has that been specific to any of your customers in particular?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In fact, we're going through a deployment as we speak. And you used the word accelerate. I will actually use the word mandate for COVID. So what's happened here is this is a large public sector. It's a K through 12 school district. They have 800 MFPs. And prior to the COVID pandemic, they had plans to refresh their fleet. They were at the end of their managed print service agreement. We're about to renew, and then cost savings, had to be delivered. So they ultimately decided to delay their upgrade of their fleet. Unlike most businesses, they also had to reduce their staff. So they lost a whole bunch of IT professionals in their organization. So what to do? You have print management that's required. You have this legacy set of devices that are in situ right now. So what we were able to provide for them is a hardware very similar to the OMNI Bridge that allows those school networks to connect to the Ysoft cloud. We moved all their on-premise infrastructure to the cloud and saved 50 servers from their environment. We were also to leverage all of their existing MFPs. Some of their MFPs weren't able to run those pure cloud environments, didn't have the up-to-date platform capabilities from Xerox as they are selling today, but we were able to leverage every one of them. And finally, IT typically is maintaining the print drivers that are deployed to end users' desktops. We also deployed a universal print driver, which removed the need for them to manage and deploy these disparate print drivers in those environments.
Yeah, and I think that just really shows how cloud can really have an impact on driving cost efficiencies. And you mentioned there about the reduction or elimination of print servers, which really account for a significant cost on an on-premise traditional print environment. So I think that was a really great example of how an organization can reduce costs and drive efficiencies by reducing the IT administration costs as well as managing that environment. So yeah, great example. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So just moving on slightly, in terms of what we're seeing next in the industry, where we're obviously seeing there's a lot of vendors, it's become quite a diverse market in terms of the OEMs and the ISVs, and even the MPS, independent MPS providers in terms of how they're tackling the market. What would you say are the opportunities coming next in cloud printing, and perhaps how your channel partners and OEM partners as well can improve the conversations they're having to accelerate the move to cloud printing?
Yeah, appreciate that. So I will offer a few views here. One of them is what I'll call all-inclusive. So like any disruptive technology, typically the new technology isn't as feature-rich as the technology it's replacing. And I think we're seeing that to some extent now, where people are just happy, or customers are just happy to get to the cloud and the benefits of that. And they're satisfied with a pull print offering, maybe that alone. But what we're seeing now is people are expecting more. Customers are demanding more requirements. So when I say all inclusive, it's not just the print management capabilities, but in that application, document capture and workflow, potentially some facts if you're in an environment that's heavy in facts like financial services and in healthcare. They want card readers that are integrated to their environment, with one stop to shop. So I think what we're finding is the vendors that can provide that all-inclusive approach to cloud and not, once again, disparate technologies to get a customer through their cloud journey using different technology, but a single technology will win the day. Okay. The second thing that I'll mention is important that we're finding is inherently when you move to cloud, there's a lot of benefits that you get. Security, we already mentioned, but you also get countless improvements around reliability. But you know what? It's not 100%. And there are going to be days where you are challenged and your print may be not working as expected. So who do you call when you're literally in a service situation and you have no idea once that print job leaves your environment where it broke? Do you call Microsoft to troubleshoot Azure? Do you call the MFP vendor to troubleshoot the device? Do you call a card reader supplier to troubleshoot that particular technology, or whoever's providing your print management capability? So we're finding that if a channel partner or an ISV like Ysoft can provide direct support for any particular problem that customer might be having, that solves a lot of the challenges and concerns that particular customer might have. Okay. The third view is something I mentioned earlier, which is around these extensions. So what we're finding is, as we move our customers to print in the cloud, they are also considering other technologies for the cloud: CRM systems, ERP systems, legal systems, finance systems, and they expect interoperability between those technologies. So if you are in, say, using LegalZoom for your legal cloud service, you want to be able to scan documents directly from LegalZoom into LegalZoom, not an ad hoc process to your desktop and then upload. So we're finding the necessity to develop those extensions to deliver that capability. And then last, I think all resellers should assure their customers that there will be a day where we return to work. We are back in the office. So whatever technologies they're deploying now to get through this work from home type of environment we find ourselves in should be future-proof, so that when we do return to the office, that the end user experience is the same, the IT management experiences are the same, the security obligations and expectations are the same. So just keep that in mind as you deploy work from home, that one day we all hopefully will return to work, and those experiences should be the same and technologies should work just as expected.
Yeah, and I think you raised two really interesting points there that I'd just like to pick up on. And one is the extensions and really the opportunity to target more vertical industry focused solutions. And we're definitely seeing that, particularly around cloud marketplaces and a different way that organizations are starting to procure cloud solutions. And also the point around professional services. We're seeing this as well in the kind of general cloud channel, whether it's AWS or Google Cloud Print or Microsoft Azure, that they're really sort of encouraging their channel to build professional services. And I think ISVs who have that capability are more likely to succeed in this cloud printing market, because there's still going to be a huge opportunity for integration services. Especially as you say, it's all about future proofing and helping companies transition as they do move from that kind of remote to more hybrid work environment. So, yeah, I think it's been a really great conversation. You've touched on some really interesting areas, and as I say, cloud printing is such a diverse market at the moment, and it's really interesting to hear how Ysoft is approaching the market with this dual approach. I just really wanted to end on the question around what you plan to do post-pandemic. I know you've got offices in the Czech Republic, and have you got any plans to travel once lockdown measures are relaxed? I know in the US you're already able to leave the country, unlike us in the UK.
Right. It's actually a coincidental question. I'm actually departing for my first international trip since the pandemic started on Saturday. So there has been a series of business discussions that we've delayed and delayed and delayed, like many other organizations around the world. And we've gotten to the point now where we feel this face-to-face meeting has to occur. So what's next for Ysoft? I will say I can't share all the detail in this public setting, but I'll give a hint as to what we're going to be discussing during these strategic sessions. One is you will see an absolute expansion of our cloud portfolio. That's not only just more features, we need to migrate existing features from on-prem, but also innovative and new capabilities. The cloud brings a unique set of challenges that require a new set of innovations to satisfy. Just moving your on-prem solution to the cloud will not provide the success that you might envision. The second is in that expand cloud portfolio bucket is 3D print in the cloud. So one of the technologies that Ysoft has is 3D printing, both hardware and application to render those 3D models and print. We're migrating that infrastructure to the cloud as well. So you'll see that in our future. The second is the OMNI Bridge platform. I mentioned that it is a platform. There are two applications that exist today. One we spoke about in depth here, which is allowing customers to connect their environment to the SafeQ cloud print environment. But the other is for Microsoft Universal Print. We have a pretty exciting roadmap around OMNI as a platform as a whole. So we feel that from a customer's standpoint and a reseller standpoint, that those OMNI bridges are really a way to sell future value and to get future benefit through the applications that we will provide on an ongoing basis. And one thing that you touched on earlier is this consultative approach that was leading to this question here. We're finding just the same. So most people, when they think about cloud and resellers, typical messages are, it has to be simple, it has to be convenient. And we totally agree. In order to deploy, it needs to be simple and convenient. But just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean that customers don't want to have a consultative conversation, or there is not a requirement for professional services to achieve a particular resiliency that they require, a segregation of data that's expected, or just simply want to know the architecture. This consultative approach is something we're taking seriously and are going to build out over the next quarters and months to come.
Okay, so some exciting plans ahead. And, I've actually visited the offices a couple of years ago in Prague, and it was really interesting to see how innovation is very key to Ysoft's vision and strategy, and, particularly on the 3D printing side as well. So it's great to hear that you've got, future plans in all of those areas. So thanks again, Anthony, for joining today's podcast. It's been really interesting to hear more about Ysoft's vision and strategy. And thanks again.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
So thank you for joining today's In the Spotlight with Quocirca episode. For more information, please go to quocirca.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in our next podcast episode.